Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sharing Symposium Session 3, Collaborating for Age-Friendly Community Resiliency. My name is Laura Cantwell, and I am with AARP Florida, and we're so glad that you've joined us today. On today's session, we have an amazing panel. We're going to be hearing from Brenda Supernot, Zach Eichholz, Paul Lewis, Susan Berger, Rebecca Roberts, and Victoria Funes. And this is the third in a series of 4 sessions that are talking about our age-friendly community network. If you missed any of our previous sessions, you can go online and look at those sessions 1, 2, and 3. And we have another one, our 4th in our series in October, which will give you that information at the end of the presentation. And to get us started today, as everybody is joining us, we're going to be using some polling throughout the presentation. And this is just quickly how you can join that polling device. You go to pollev.com and the username is friendly. So pollev.com/friendly. And we'll go ahead and get started with our first question and just give everybody a minute. All right, so we have Pinellas, Sarasota. And again, if you're trying to figure this out, you go to pollev.com/friendly as the username. Leon, Sarasota, Tallahassee, Miramar, Cape Canaveral. And as a suggestion, if you're doing more than one word, just put the words together so that they'll show together. I think we have Winter Park, the capital city, Marion, Seminole. Great, great. Such good attendance from across the state. We'll just give it another minute as everybody, if you're just joining us, we are starting off with a polling device, pollev.com/friendly, where you can add in where you're joining us from today. And as a reminder for housekeeping throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A chat. It's at the bottom of your screen, and you can ask questions for the panelists. We will bring them together twice during the presentation so that we can hear from you and answer some of your questions. Great. All right, let's get started. So our first presenter is going to be Brenda Supernot from the city of Cape Canaveral. Brenda is a city planner in Cape Canaveral. We're also going to be hearing from Zach later on as well. So Brenda, I'll go ahead and start with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Good morning, everyone. As Laura said, my name is Brenda. I'm the senior planner with the city of Cape Canaveral, and I'm going to be talking about our resilience efforts. Next slide. So before we begin, I want to set a little bit of context. Cape Canaveral is a barrier island community in Brevard County. We're that tiny little outline there in the middle of the top of the screen. We are just south of the Port Canaveral area and north of Cocoa Beach. Next. So Cape Canaveral is a really interesting community. It is a barrier island, as I said before. We've got the Banana River on the west and then the Atlantic Ocean on the east. We're only about 2 square miles, about 10,000 residents. And we have one of our major thoroughfares for the state running through the city, and that's State Road A1A. Next slide. Now, we can't talk about resilience without talking about the socioeconomic profile of the city of Cape Canaveral. Most of the people in this city are 65 years and older, and the overall median age is 57 years old. Approximately 17% of our residents in the city are living with a disability. So that means when we talk about social vulnerabilities, it's not just about hurricane preparedness or being environmentally friendly. It's really about how we can support the residents and build a system that can move us from natural disasters, disease outbreaks like the pandemic that we've recently experienced, and any other kind of shocks or stressors that we might deal with in the future. Next slide. So this is a general graphic that I like to use. It's a really good demonstration of kind of the population breakdown of the city. As you'll see, it's kind of top heavy, if you will, meaning we do have a lot of older residents, but we do on the flip side have a good chunk of younger residents as well. We do have an elementary school. And so it's within our city, we're always trying to strike the balance between what some of our older residents need and then what some of our younger and vulnerable residents need as well. Next. So our role and our path with vulnerabilities and resilience really started in 2018 and 2019. In partnership with the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, we did a vulnerability assessment. And it really looked at sea level rise and flooding in Cape Canaveral, but it also did take into account those social vulnerabilities. Next slide. At the same time, AARP approached the city and asked if we were interested in joining with the Livable Communities and helping them promote the 8 domains of livability. So while we were doing our Resilient Cape Canaveral vulnerability assessment, kind of occurred to us that we could hit 2 birds with 1 stone, if you will, and kind of combine our initiatives. And when we decided to do that, we decided to move it into an action plan stage. So in 2019, we did the Resilient Cape Canaveral vulnerability assessment. And then we also joined AARP in early 2020. Next slide. The result of which is what we're calling Resilient Cape Canaveral. So within this document, we've kind of married the 2 initiatives. We've got our vulnerability assessment and we've got the 8 domains of livability. And within this plan, we've created a number of goals and action items that we hope to accomplish. They run the gamut between social and economic and educational initiatives, and then to really hard infrastructure, things like fortifying for storm or for sea level rise, for hurricanes and things like that. And so for us, it's not just about looking at age alone or the natural disasters, but really trying to combine those and make a really livable city for our residents. Next slide. So these are the action categories that we use in our action plan. Generally, they are organized with some similarity with the 8 domains of livability, as you will see. For example, transportation, we know that that is a target that we are striving to meet with various options. We're looking at a lot of things that have to do with more EV-friendly infrastructure, more pedestrian improvements, not just having people heavily rely on automobiles, especially when we have an aging community that might not always work for them. So we're trying to make it more bikeable, walkable, and safer for everyone all around. Next slide. And that's all I have for you. Zach's going to talk a little bit more in depth about our actual projects that we're working on and how we're trying to meet our goals.
Thank you so much, Brenda. I appreciate it. And we'll turn it over to Zach now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Eichholz. I'm the Deputy Community and Economic Development Director and Sustainability Manager for the City of Cape Canaveral. I'm not as good as on camera as Brenda is, so I'm going to be reading from a script. Otherwise, I'd probably be talking about this stuff all day, and I know we don't have time for that. It's very exciting stuff. But with that, next, please. Okay, so Brenda gave some great background and context into the city's current socioeconomic situation and vulnerabilities. As she also said, we've begun to lay the policy groundwork with documents like the city's 2019 vulnerability assessment and 2021 Resiliency Action Plan for system-wide changes to how the city functions and conducts its day-to-day operations. I'm going to now sort of give you a virtual tour showcasing some of the hard infrastructure responses and spin-offs to these policy changes that are actually being put into place to fulfill the needs of all residents of all ages and abilities, while also responding to known vulnerabilities such as more intense storms and flooding for increased resilience. Many of the projects you are going to see have all come about within the last 5 years or so, so relatively recently. So overall progress in this of the city's sustainability and resilience program has been relatively quick, with many more projects on the way in the near future. First, we have one of our flagship age-friendly initiatives, the City of Cape Canaveral Community Center, which you can see here on this slide, being built at Canaveral City Park. This two-story, 24,000 square foot community center being built in a centralized location to make accessibility easy for community members will feature a full-size gymnasium, indoor running track, climbing wall, game room, exercise room for classes, as well as full fitness area with cardio and weightlifting machines, common areas for events, and city functions that can range from hosting anything from a business incubator to blood drives, or even perhaps in the era of COVID-19 vaccine distribution. The point is, the building will offer a multitude of amenities designed for all ages and abilities to take advantage of as needed during normal and abnormal operations. Now, why do I say that? Next slide, please. So city staff is working towards making the Cape Canaveral Community Center the city's first dedicated resilience hub. A resilience hub is basically a location that can offer community services to residents during all types of operating conditions and become a focal point for community involvement, revitalization, and civic engagement. This building will one day be utilized, or could one day be utilized, as a food distribution point after a natural disaster or bottled water, or as an area for comfort when the power is out. We intend to facilitate this with the use of renewable energy. The community center will soon become the first municipal building in Cape Canaveral to host a rooftop solar array sized at 48 kilowatts. In the near future, we plan to match this solar array with a battery storage system that will allow the building to be island from the grid and operates independently, offering communications, electricity, Wi-Fi, and cooling for those who may not have it in the community after a disaster such as a hurricane. The building's solar system will also help to lower utility bills and lower the city's overall greenhouse gas emissions by 2,592 tons over the system's 25-year plus lifespan. Next slide, please. Several more city buildings and facilities are planned to have rooftop solar arrays in order to provide continued utility savings and greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Here's an example of the system we plan to install atop our Public Works Services Administration building in the next fiscal year. A small 10 kilowatt system that will save the city an estimated $55,000 in energy costs and 272 tons of greenhouse gas emissions over its own 25-year lifespan. Of the 4 rooftop solar systems we currently have planned together, these 4 systems will reduce city utility bills by over $500,000 over their 25-year lifespan and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 3,624 tons while helping to one day ensure continuity of operations. Next slide, please. So for a number of years, the city lacked a dedicated city center, so to speak, or an area where residents would traditionally gather around for commerce, cultural, and leisure events. To address this, the city is moving forward with an ongoing development of municipal area that would fulfill the social and economic needs of residents while also being mindful of the environment. This effort has culminated in what is being called the Municipal Complex. The complex contains the new City Hall building, which you can see here on this slide, adjacent plaza, the Cape Canaveral Public Library, Brevard County Sheriff's Office, a new dog park called Rover Space, which we'll see in a moment, a soon-to-be renovated cultural center, and the city's leisure services facilities, which encompass a series of tennis and racquetball courts, open grass areas, and street spaces for public events. Considerations in the continuing development of the complex include walkable and bikeable facilities, incorporating appropriate pedestrian-based infrastructure, sustainable design and connectivity, all while creating a sense of place and offering public services. A standout within the complex is certainly the new City Hall, which is LEED Silver equivalent and hosts a whole range of sustainable and resilience-based initiatives inside of it, including LED lighting, ADA compliance, water bottle refilling stations, touchless toilets and faucets, tankless water heaters, and a stormwater exfiltration system underneath the parking lot to capture stormwater runoff. There's also a data server room located upstairs to protect against flooding situations. Next slide, please. So the old City Hall, which was built in 1966, it sits just across from the new City Hall. That building is going to be redeveloped into a cultural heritage center that will appreciate the history of the city, which is pretty rich, given that it grew up alongside the space race of the 1960s. And it will complement a whole host of educational series, art classes, rotating art exhibits, things like that. So very exciting. The municipal complex in general has a whole host of bike-friendly infrastructure, bike fix-it stations, walking paths, and it also saw the first mural that was put in the city, which you can see here on this slide, which was intended to celebrate the 1960 space race, and it was inaugurated in 2019, the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. So the community had a lot of input with this. It went to our community appearance board and it was unanimously approved. So a very beautiful piece, and it is the first of many murals that we have now implemented in the city. Next slide, please. So another amenity in the municipal complex, as I previously discussed, was the city's first dog park, which you can see here, which opened in 2019, just across from that mural I just showed you, actually. It's called Rover Space, and it features solar-powered streetlights, antibacterial astroturf, pet obstacles made from recycled composite material, a little free pantry for dog treats and food, water bottle refilling station that includes a bowl for animals, and ADA-compliant walkways that are made from a permeable material that is made from recycled tires that allows rainwater to flow right through it for enhanced stormwater capture. Next slide, please. So public participation and understanding of the projects we do is extremely important. Community buy-in is key to advancing initiatives and making lasting change. One of the greatest examples I think that is probably showcases that is the city's annual sea oats planting. Each year, this event draws dozens and sometimes even hundreds of people to the city's shoreline, where volunteers help to plant thousands of sea oats in the beach's dune system. In the past 3 years alone, we have been able to plant 40,000 sea oats, which serve to increase the resilience of the city's dune system by stabilizing the dunes via the growth of their deep root systems, acting like rebar wood in a concrete building. This helps to protect homes along the city's eastern shoreline in the event of storm surge or a high king tide. Since 2005, the city has planted well over 100,000 sea oats. And although it is not shown on the slide, I also want to quickly mention that the city has 4 Moby mats at 4 different beach crossovers that allow wheelchair-bound individuals to access the beach up to a certain point. They also just make standing on the beach sand easier by providing a stable platform for people in general, especially those who may be older and not have the best balance. Next slide, please. The city also has a community garden that was built in 2016. Since then, it has incrementally been added to and enhanced to include things like a larger raised beds, which you can see on flanking each side of the garden there. A rainwater capture system, which you can see in that tank, in the form of that tank in the background, and a little free library and pantry where books and canned goods can be freely exchanged. Having and maintaining public spaces like this is ever more important in a post-COVID world where people can come and enjoy socially distanced activities that also provide education, awareness, and in this case, even sustenance. Next slide, please. So in keeping with the theme of increasing outdoor public spaces and utilizing green infrastructure where we can to reduce environmental impacts, the city completed its first stormwater pocket park in 2019. Called Wagner Park, this small space was built alongside one of the city's main thoroughfares, North Atlantic Avenue, and was designed to be a place where residents can stop, have a seat under a shade canopy on a hot day, enjoy the beauty of the park's Florida native foliage, get a drink of water, and maybe even watch a rocket launch. The park's construction also included a bioswale to hold stormwater runoff, permeable pavement, solar-powered lighting, a bike fix-it station, and bike racks. A pre-existing bus shelter is also located here that is utilized by Space Coast Area Transit, so people can also enjoy these amenities while waiting for a bus ride. Next slide, please. Emergency preparedness is an incredibly critical component to any community trying to be resilient. We've already touched on some aspects of this with our future rooftop solar arrays, but emergency preparedness needs to go beyond what these systems can offer alone. We've begun to utilize mobile solar generator technology that can be deployed alongside existing fossil fuel-based generators that offer quieter and cleaner operations after a natural disaster. The unit seen here on this slide is capable of powering and recharging numerous mission-critical devices at any given time, including cell phones, laptops, power tools, audio equipment, and external lighting fixtures and certain appliances. Its three 335-watt LG solar panels have a daily energy harvest of 6 kilowatt hours with an inverter output of 3.5 kilowatts, which is about 3,500 watts, with a surge of 6 kilowatts or 6,000 watts. The included batteries are charged by the unit's solar panels, have an overall lifespan of 12 to 15 years, and can last up to 2 days on a single charge. When not dealing with an emergency, the generator can be used at city events such as at Founders Day, which is where it is here in this photo, helping to power the event's live concert. Next slide, please. So let's switch gears and take a deeper look at the city's effort to modernize its transportation sector and fleet operations. Being the city of Cape Canaveral is only 1.9 square miles in size, we have the opportunity to build a localized transportation network that does not solely rely on automobiles as the primary form of transportation. In 2021, there are many more ways than ever to move around that don't include an individual car. And we as a city are trying to develop systems that enhance the walkability and bikeability of the community so that it is safer, cleaner, and more efficient, especially for residents that do not have access to a car or cannot drive. Next slide, please. As such, we've been building out the number of bike racks and bike pedestrian friendly infrastructure where we can to encourage walking and biking with things like new bike lanes and corridors, with appropriate supporting infrastructure such as bike fix-it stations, which I've talked about before, safety lighting and markers, water fountains, pedways, and wayfinding signage. We have been heavily investing in complete street designs that incorporate infrastructure for all modes of transportation. To date, we have done new complete street redevelopment designs across 3 of the largest and most heavily trafficked city-owned roads: North Atlantic Avenue, seen here, Ridgewood Avenue, and a portion of West Central Boulevard. Next, please. So finally, we have our own vehicle fleet. The U.S. auto industry is quickly moving towards complete electrification of its vehicle offerings and services in an effort to modernize the overall transportation sector, meet regulatory requirements, and meaningfully reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Since the U.S. transportation sector is now actually the largest economic sector in terms of emissions released. Cape Canaveral currently has a vehicle fleet of 29 vehicles, and already 25% of them can be considered electrified with the use of either hybrids or all-electric vehicles. We have a goal to transition the entire fleet to alternative fuel vehicles by 2035. Next big step in this area for us is definitely the acquisition of all-electric pickup trucks. Electric vehicles offer so much more than gas-powered vehicles for many reasons, many of which have to do with enhanced resilience. Much of this boils down to the fact that we can still power these vehicles if the power goes out with on-site renewable energy installations, such as the solar arrays. We cannot manufacture our own gasoline or diesel fuel, nor do we have any storage space for them. Next slide, please. Now, all this would be for naught if the community didn't understand why we were doing all this and understand the benefits of doing all of it. Communication is key, and it must be wide-reaching across multiple platforms to ensure residents can receive it in a timely and efficient manner. We have our own in-house communications team that puts out information on a daily basis via Facebook, Instagram, Nextdoor, YouTube, Twitter, the city's website, and written material available at city buildings. Next slide, please. We also use something called the Weekly Update, which is a weekly email blast that goes out each Monday morning to subscribers. It is sort of like a press release that highlights with pretty good amount of detail what is going on in and around the city across each department. It is a great breakdown of information that also has a ton of helpful additional links. Through all of our platforms, we have tens of thousands of followers, and we can also blast emergency messages to residents via phone calls and text messages if necessary with something that is time sensitive, such as getting ready for a hurricane or perhaps a rocket launch or things of that nature. Next slide, please. And that is all we have for you from the city of Cape Canaveral. Thank you, everybody, for listening. and I will hand it off to the next speaker.
Zach, thank you so much. That was amazing to hear everything that's happening in Cape Canaveral. And I look forward to talking to you and Brenda after we hear from Paul. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So up next, we have Paul Lewis, who is Chief Planning Manager for the City of Orlando. Thank you so much for joining us today, Paul.
Sure. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our Livable Orlando action plan that we're working on, but really with more of a focus on our session today and resiliency. Next slide, please. Just so everybody kind of knows where Orlando is in this process, we started, or we're in the creating of the action plan component of it. We're writing, we're assembling data and all that kind of good stuff. Next slide, please. So basically, we have completed our age-friendly survey, our livability survey. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about this, other than if people are interested in it, we do have a link in this that would take you to a summary of all the different survey responses, and they basically are formed around the 8 domains of livability. And next slide, please. So what I wanted to talk about today was kind of how we're approaching our age-friendly work, but also the way I like to phrase it is basically cross-pollinating all of our age-friendly work with all the other efforts that are underway or have been recently completed. And those include our Greenworks Orlando Community Action Plan, which actually was adopted in 2018. And that has a lot of the same type of subject matter that Zach just went over, but for City of Orlando. And for those that want a sense of scale, City of Orlando is approximately 120 square miles in size. And we have a population of about 307,000 based on the latest census number. So it's a very large city and getting larger. When I first started working with the city in 1986, I think we were at about 128,000, somewhere in that range. In addition to the Greenworks sustainability plan, we also have something called Future Ready City, and that's kind of what I'll be focusing on today. We're also working on a parks master plan, and including a 10-minute walk to a park analysis. We're just getting started on a downtown master plan. We've already incorporated a complete street strategy into our growth management plan and in our land development code. We have a new set of Orlando transportation guidelines. Back in, I believe it was 2019, I think it was, maybe 2020, we adopted our Vision Zero action plan. And there are a couple of other large affordable housing efforts that the City of Orlando was involved with, including the Regional Affordable Housing Initiative that was put together and involved Orange, Seminole, Osceola, and the City of Orlando. And that came in with a lot of really good strategies for dealing with affordable housing issues. And of course, Orange County did a Housing for All 10-year action plan that was approved last year. And they're already working very hard on that, as is the City of Orlando. I'm not going to go into great detail about all those, other than I wanted to focus on the Future Ready City. So let's go next. Next slide, sorry. So this is just, I'm not going to stay long on this particular slide, but the vision statement for the Orlando Future Ready City is: Orlando will become America's premier future ready city by staying ahead of our opportunities and ensuring the city beautiful remains a global destination where everyone can thrive. And then the mission statement, looking to the future and leveraging innovation and collaboration to enhance our services and investments. Next slide. So what does that mean? So essentially, a future ready city will lead to a place where we can actually utilize the creative force of the and empower our folks to utilize innovation technology. We should work to create a place of prosperity, safety, equity, sustainability, resiliency, and diversity for future generations. All of that's wonderful, but it's really, I think, important to think about this as being a people first endeavor. Next slide. So the Future Ready Master Plan was actually accepted by Orlando City Council on May 17th of this year. Of course, the year and a half before that, we had a number of community engagement venues, including internal interviews, focus area roundtables, public workshops. We even had a really cool virtual workshop that you could go into, and you know, you could go from a start, you put in your contact information, you would go around, basically you could do your dot exercises on the computer, which was pretty cool. And at the same time that was going on, we were also doing similar community engagement with our age-friendly livability survey. In fact, I went to all of the Future Ready community meetings and introduced the survey, our age-friendly survey, at the same time. So people got surveyed a lot as part of this process. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So just like our friends at AARP, we had a word cloud. And these are all the things that kind of came out of the Future Ready project. And I think it's fun to kind of look in between the words inclusive, safe, innovative, and responsive in the top. And you'll see age-friendly is kind of sitting there in the middle. And that's probably because I was sitting in the crowd and participating in the poll. So anyway, next slide, please. So the Future Ready city goals are dealing with connectivity. And it was funny when you start looking at these goals in relation to the age-friendly and the 8 domains of livability, you'll see that there's a lot of overlap between the two. Connectivity, bridging the digital divide and providing residents and visitors with digital services, and all in an effort to improve civic engagement. We also get into energy and materials, kind of on the sustainability side, water, health and safety. You're starting to get into the same areas that we have in the 8 domains of livability, and of course the built environment aspects are also there in terms of mobility and also in placemaking. So I don't know how much I need to go into that, but I think we all can see where the marriage of the two planning efforts can really come into make sense. So next slide, please. I'm not going to go through all of these, but they, as with any action plan, you end up with short-term strategies and mid to long-term strategies. And I think some of the interesting ones, I'm going to try to really focus on some of the short-term strategies right now. But on the long-term side, there are some really cool things that will be coming up, and we'll be working on in terms of land development code amendments, traffic optimization, and smart street lighting, a lot of other really cool things. But let's go on to the next slide. So some of the Future Ready short-term strategies that we're looking at, I think basically one of the things we need to do is better define it. And so it's always about data. And so we're constantly making sure that we have the best available data and kind of identifying the areas in our city that are don't have very good broadband access. So that was one of the first steps that we did. We're also working with Valencia College on a mapping project as well. And then we've implemented a hotspot and tablet checkout pilot program in some of those areas that are having some issues. Those basically allow people to check out the a hotspot equipment and a tablet, and you can use them for 2 weeks and bring them back again. And there's about a week separation between you could check them out a second time or a third time. And essentially what that program is going pretty well so far. Our Greenworks zero waste aspect is also developing a food recovery app for foods that kind of the reverse of an Uber or a type of situation where people can say if they have food that can be picked up from their homes and brought to a place where a food bank can utilize them. We're also working on a digital twin for the city of Orlando that would essentially allow for computerized access or a virtual access to for people that are first responders, or also looking at modeling for stormwater and renewable energy. And it's going to be built upon GIS and using real-time data. And of course, we're also doing an advanced smart building pilot, which for wayfinding and safety and security, and which I think will have some positive impacts for people with disabilities and for our elders. Next slide, please. Some of the kind of interesting things that people might not be thinking about, but well, people are thinking about it, but we're also working on an integrated transit application with real-time information and for multimodal choices, kind of an all everything in one place type of deal. And I just wanted to mention a couple things here. We've got an urban autonomous shuttle pilot, which I'll talk about in a minute, but also the city is working with NASA and with this Greater Orlando Aviation Authority and the city and some private folks to look at the advanced air mobility plan. The flying electric cars, believe it or not, they are coming. And they will probably be flying around in within several years. So next slide, please. I wanted to give you a couple of real world examples of in Orlando. So the first one is the Move Nona autonomous shuttles that exist in the Lake Nona property. Lake Nona, for those that don't know it, is a development about 9,000 acres in size, south and east over the Orlando International Airport. We have probably 4,000 units of new urbanist type development in terms of neighborhoods, and we also they also have something called the Medical City, which is an area where we have the UCF Medical School, VA Medical Center. It's about 1 million square feet of medical center there, Nemours Children's Hospital. And what this particular autonomous mobility provider does is have these vehicles that are going in back and forth between the 1.2 million square foot town center, the VA Medical Center, the UCF site, and the neighborhood, and as well as Nemours Children's Hospital. They're all ADA accessible. The shuttles arrive at about every 10 to 15 minutes, which is actually better than our local transit provider of regular buses. And you can obviously, you can also schedule and track in real time by downloading the Ride Beep app, which is pretty cool. And then let's move on to the next slide. This is another example, also in that same area, and it's what we call the Green Link Park. The Green Link is a linear park system that will connect the residential and commercial zones of the Lake Nona Medical City town center area to the Lake Nona neighborhood off to the east. And the park is going to be framed by mid-rise mixed-use development that will be activated by civic space, bike pedestrian facilities. The Move Nona autonomous vehicles will be present there, as well as, and the main purpose of this area is also to do stormwater conveyance, and basically all in a really attractive urban environment. We've already approved the master plan for this. and they are working on the engineering, and we hope to see this probably in place within the next 3 to 5 years. It's a very exciting project for us. Has a lot of different aspects of livability and city planning and placemaking involved with it. So next slide, please. So I'm kind of jumping back away from planning a little bit and talking about our resiliency efforts. One of the things that we're doing, similar to Zach and Cape Canaveral, is we have, I think it's something on the order of 11 or 13 community centers in Orlando. And we will be creating resiliency hubs at each of those community centers. And of course, the Resiliency Hub is has a lot of different things, aspects to it. You have an off-grid solar power aspect, and obviously the main focus is communications for your residents, particularly before and after a storm event. So that's ongoing right now. And I'm gonna go to the next slide, please. So in relation to that, we are also a proud recipient of a 2021 AARP Community Challenge grant for what we are calling our Tables of Connection project. In this grant, we were, I think, one of 8 grantees in Florida. And we're working really hard to make sure we meet our deadline of November 10. But the project includes the purchase and installation of wheelchair accessible solar operated table and shade structure in 2 of our neighborhood parks. And Prince Hall Park in kind of in our northwest area of Orlando, and Willows Park, I'm sorry, Prince Hall is in southwest, and Willows Park in the northwest portion of Orlando. They're going to be outfitted with Wi-Fi hotspots and charging stations, and each table will connect residents to the internet, charge up to 4 wireless devices, and power 4 laptops at once. They're also going to be located within 2 neighborhoods that are lack broadband service, about 57% and 33%. Respectively, and that's much higher than our Orlando average of about 18%. The tables are rated for 175-mile-an-hour winds, and again, they'll kind of allow for communications during or after a storm event, allowing people to charge their phones and call loved ones and that kind of good stuff. I think what's unique about this particular project is it's not just a technology project. We're also going to be working with local artists to decorate the concrete pads upon which the tables will sit, and we'll be involving the community. The artists will actually be doing the outline of the artwork, and our community residents will be helping to paint the artwork. And the Prince Hall Park will actually be kind of focused on history of Prince Hall, who was a leader in African American equity and all that kind of good stuff from a century ago. So it's a really a cool history project for us as well. And we're looking forward. I wish I had slides or images that I can show you of it, but we are about a month away, or about 3 weeks away from the artwork being done. So we're excited about this particular project, and we wanted to thank AARP for that opportunity. And I'm going to jump ahead to the next slide, please. This is not really related to resiliency, but it is related to our age-friendly work. We wanted to do something a little bit different, so I wanted to kind of highlight this as kind of a fun portion of our community engagement. We are actually doing a Words and Wonders and Words and Wisdom edition of our poetry contest. We have each quarter, the city of Orlando hosts a poetry contest. And we thought that we would be, in previous years, we've done, a theme had been the seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall. And this time we wanted to do something that would tie into our age-friendly work. And so the current theme is about words and wisdom of our elders. So that is the poetry contest is currently open. And in addition to the prizes that normally come about with these kind of this particular poetry contest, we are also anticipating utilizing the winning poems as chapter dividers in our action plan, our age-friendly action plan. So kind of a fun way of bringing the community into the planning effort. And I think, let's move on to the next slide. Yep, this is the end of my presentation, and I've provided links in here to the Future Ready Master Plan or Orlando Green Works Initiative, which has a lot of information in regards to what the city is doing in terms of its sustainability and resiliency efforts. There's so much in there that could be a 30-minute presentation all by itself, and then our age-friendly initiative work as well. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Paul. All of this is really exciting. We did have a comment in the Q&A about how much somebody loves the table of connection. We can't wait to see until that's finished as well. What a really unique, interesting idea. Well, now I want to stop, and if you have a question, please take a moment to put it in the Q&A, but I would like to ask Zach and Brenda to come back and join me so we can have a little bit of a panel discussion. And again, we'll be monitoring the Q&A, and please add in any questions that you may have there. All right, I'm just gonna, and while we're talking, we also have another poll everywhere set up, so feel free to add that in. If you did a poll everywhere earlier, it will just move forward on your phone or your computer, so you can start now. But to get started, first of all, thank you all. What incredible work. It's just, it's amazing to hear about the innovations that are happening and the unique ideas, and we really, really appreciate you guys being here today, sharing with us. I wanted to start with a question for everybody here and ask, what suggestions do you have for those that are listening today, the audience, on how they can connect in their community with municipal leaders, with planners, since you all are planners here, on such important efforts as you just mentioned? So do you have any? So I guess I'll get started. I know you guys were talking a lot about the listening sessions that you were having and the community inputs, but if you could just give a little bit of advice that you would have as a community of how you can connect with other initiatives that are happening.
So for us at Cape Canaveral, it really is about outreach, and a lot of the times that means going to where people are. So we do have some decent relationships with some of our HOAs and some of our community leaders. And so we go to them. Another example of this is when we were doing our vulnerability assessment, we went to Cape View, to the elementary school, and we did part of our outreach with the kids, so that we really did get both spectrums of age groups and input. So they were able to give us kind of their suggestions on what they thought a resilient Cape Canaveral looked like. And then we did a lot of the outreach with the general population, if you will, with the older residents. So that's one way we reach people, is really trying to go to them.
Great, thank you. That's an excellent example. And your resiliency plan was so connected with all ages and with all aspects of the community. You can really see that. Paul, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think Brenda's exactly right. You go to where the people are. And in those earlier sessions, I kind of glossed over it a little bit when we talked about our age-friendly livability survey, but we went to just a lot of different events to get people to participate in our survey. My favorite was the gospel event. I can't remember the exact name of it. Motown Goes Gospel, I think it was the event at our community center down in the southwest portion of Orlando. I think we had 400 attendees for that particular workshop, and it was our event, and we just were one of the happy people sitting behind a table and talking to people as they kind of meandered about in the at the event. So yeah, it really is that. We also, as part of our survey work, in addition to going to our community centers, we actually went out and visited a number of the City of Orlando has a number of senior living facilities and things like that. So we went and visited there. In fact, one of our recreation center directors went I think to several of the primarily Hispanic senior living facilities and some other. So it's really is just getting out there and what we did notice though is that it is because a lot of our work kind of shut down a little bit with the pandemic. It was a little bit harder to get some of that engagement done after March of last year. So I don't know if I have a solution for that, but that was luckily we had gotten most of our survey work done before that shutdown occurred.
Yes, that really, we all have been thinking outside of the box of how to keep getting community inputs in a much different world now than what we had before. Thank you all. Those were great answers. Zach, I know you spent a lot of time showing with the resiliency work you guys are doing, how it really connects to the 8 domains of livability with age friendly. I think we all want to come visit your city center. That looked amazing. We really appreciated you going over that. But was there anything in this work as you guys started down the path of age friendly that really surprised you about the synergy between the resiliency work that you were doing and with the age friendly?
I think they as we went down the path, I think it actually all unfolded very they all complemented each other very well. And I think they really can't exist without each other. You know, sustainability, resilience, age friendly, they all have a place and they can't be done independently. The thing, you know, you can be resilient, but not necessarily sustainable and vice versa. So really making sure that we cover all of our bases in the urban planning that we are doing, I think is really important to try and check all those boxes, because, you know, this for this city, it's about, you know, ensuring that those vulnerable populations can have their needs met in a increasingly climate challenged world, especially being a Barrier Island city, like Brenda said. So the age friendly and resilience and sustainability for us when we were embarking all this definitely just kind of naturally progressed as unfolding on each other, and then just making sure to fit all the pieces in that to make sure they accentuate and complement each other is important.
Great.
I was just going to say that that's a great response, Zach. I think for some of us, for instance, I've been in the city planning game for about 35 years now, and I think we do a pretty good job in Orlando of the built environment in understanding how to create beautiful parks and complete streets and all that kind of good stuff. But where we have work to do is, I think, on the social environment side of the world. That is something that the cities typically don't necessarily have as great of expertise on, and so other than park programming and recreation programming, that type of thing. So I think one of the things that I hope that will come out of this particular effort is a greater emphasis on our partnerships with the people that do provide those type of services. For instance, our mayor's committee on livability and healthy aging includes, you know, we have an AARP representative, we have people from the Senior Resource Alliance, we have people from from the medical fields and memory care. So we're trying to bring in the softer side and the social side into it as a little bit more than we may have thought about in the past as a city. I think that has great value for us to really to reach people moving forward.
Thank you so much. That's excellent. And as you guys were talking, I was just looking at some of the things that were popping up in the word cloud of where this work is aligning, and very much what you guys were just saying with the Parks and Rec, business master plans, comp plans, artwork, libraries, education. So really overlapping in lots of different areas. Before we close out this session, is there anything that you guys would like to add? Any advice or lessons learned you would like to share with everybody of the work that you're doing so far? And I know it's we're still in the middle, most of us, of doing this work.
I would say that I think the most important thing everyone needs to do is actually do a vulnerability assessment. Really, it doesn't have to be, natural disaster based, but in some form or fashion, you can't know where you're going unless you know where you're vulnerable. So I think for us, that really has laid the foundation for how we plan everything else. It laid the foundation for our action plan. It laid the foundation for us joining, the livable communities. And it's really laying the foundation for how we plan capital improvements and how we budget. So I think that is like the crux of everything. If you don't know where your holes are, you definitely won't know where you're going.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you so much, Brenda.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Because you could write a resilience plan without a vulnerability assessment and run the risk of completely over or missing key strategic areas that need to be addressed. So in my time with Cape Canaveral, the vulnerability assessment has kind of been our planning Bible in the sense that everything kind of stemmed from. So without that knowledge, I think that's super critical to do.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
I'm struggling a little bit to think of a lesson learned because we're still learning as we're going through this process, which maybe is a good way of thinking about it, that you never stop learning, and the only way to learn is really to get the perspectives of other people and what other communities are doing to see if that type of idea can be implemented in your community as well. So I think the fun part will be trying to integrate all of our different planning efforts and to get the age-friendly or the livability concepts embedded throughout all of our documents. I think that's really important for us to, and also to tell the story of why we're doing that. So I think that's probably something that I think we all need to think about, is how we can do storytelling. Mm-hmm. And so I'm rambling now, but that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul and Brenda and Zach. And as we close this out, I did have one question that asked if AARP has a vulnerability assessment model that we can use in our own community. And I will take a minute here. I know Paul mentioned our survey, the survey they were doing at Orlando's done quite a few surveys, but with the Livable Communities age-friendly process, one of the pieces of that is to start off at the very beginning and do a survey of the community. And we do have one that is available to communities that is online. And it is really easy to use. So if a community joins, we do have a version that community can use if they're interested in it. So all of that is at aarp.org/livable. And with that, thank you so much. I really appreciate, this has been a great first segment. I've learned a lot and I'm really excited about what's going on in both your communities, and I can't wait to come and visit in person. But we're going to head over to our second part of the presentation now. We're going to be hearing from Sue Berger, who is the Aging System Policy Coordinator with Sarasota County Health and Human Services. And in this section, we're going to hear a little bit, as we talk about resiliency, how communities and how the state has been addressing the pandemic this past year. So Sue, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for asking me to come and talk. Can everybody see and hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. Go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so we're moving a little bit from resiliency back to response, but I have to just say, wow, those sessions were amazing. And I know we're going to get the information, but I was furiously taking notes on all the great information. So thank you very much for that. So as I said, we're going to go from resiliency to response. And I just want to start out with a few points from early in the pandemic. So really at the start of the COVID-19 crisis, our Department of Health and our County Health and Human Services Department really tried to get some baseline information about our community capacity. That was really important. So we sent out surveys to our community nonprofits, our home health agencies, our meal providers, really any organization that we worked with through our health and human services system to find out who had to close services, how they might have to readjust their service delivery. And we did this process through Smart Sheets, which was which was really great because it automatically logged the responses into a neatly packaged table. We were easily able to read it and sort the information and quickly determine who might need some additional resources and also be able to answer questions from the public really easily with this table. Our county transportation service also conducted a survey. They did a phone survey, which was a sample of our clients in the community who were registered for transportation to our medically dependent shelters and those that used our county paratransit service. We wanted to find out how they currently were utilizing the service, were they using it to get food and essential items, and how they would plan to continue getting those services if we had to close transportation down or make some modifications. So all of this type of information was really critical in how we planned. So within a few days of whatever the March 17th or 16th date, our mass care was activated. So this sort of started our work process to coordinate services that included medical care, food, and housing. So the logistics team that we worked on was, the primary focus was food resources. So this team was comprised of our health and human service staff, as well as about 15 different community partners that included our food bank, our Meals on Wheels programs, our library, our county school system, and many others, of course, within our community. A critical part of the activation was our COAD. That's the Community Organizations Active in Disaster. So this is a partnership that consists in our community of more than 100 nonprofit organizations, businesses, volunteers, government entities, and they quickly organized, and much like the system that they talked about earlier from Cape Canaveral, they began sending out daily updates through email, sort of like a constant contact, community resources, about volunteer opportunities, funding opportunities, and then our county daily flash report, which gave information on where food sites might be located. It gave the sort of the hot sheet of where the zip codes of where the COVID, oh my gosh, my lights went out, where the COVID, the hot spots were where people were having more instances of COVID. And you'll have to excuse me, it's technology. We always have these little problems. There we go. Sorry about that. These lights in this room go off automatically if you don't move around. Anyhow, so they continue this correspondence on a daily basis. And even now that we've sort of moved past the height of the issue, they're still doing this on a weekly basis. And then, of course, like most communities, our Department of Health and our county, all of our community agencies quickly put this kind of information up on their websites, and most of them made direct links to Department of Health and the county. So I just wanted to go back and make a quick mention that in Sarasota, we're really, really fortunate. Our Department of Health, our health officer, Chuck Henry, who some of you know, is a state employee and reports to the State Department of Health, but he also is the director of Health and Human Services through our county government. So it really makes for a very cohesive team, and it gives us the ability to get issues and problems solved really quickly. And we're known, our team is known as Health and Human Services. So it incorporates both county and Department of Health employees. So next slide. So then next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more on the focus of developing our feeding plan for vulnerable populations. So this was a coordinated plan to address the food needs of our impacted residents with a priority on our vulnerable population, which obviously included a lot of our older adults. So we had to make a few planning assumptions, primarily because at the beginning, we didn't really know what the scope of the crisis was going to be. Most of our prior planning, again, like many communities, when we focus on disasters, is that sort of a point in time start. We're working with hurricanes, so we have a timeline. So we have the ability to pre-plan in the hours before and plan for the time after. So with COVID, it was a slower event. It had an unknown timeline, and there were probably going to be long-term effects that needed ongoing intervention. And of course, our older adult population, people with underlying medical conditions, our disabled population were those most affected and had the most serious consequence. Another thing that we, of course, readily understood was that we recognized with most of our planning and disaster response is about bringing people together in a mass setting, such as the shelters. And with COVID, we had that need for physical distance, which was really, it's completely opposite of what our normal planning. So as you can see from this slide, we developed sort of a phased rollout with a 3-tiered model. I know it's a little bit hard to read, but we started with an initial feeding phase. We moved to an increased feeding phase and then a disaster phase. So each phase had its own assumptions and threshold and actions. And then there was a meal threshold that provided the shift in movement to each tier, which you can see on this slide. And we generally maintain between a tier 3 level and a tier 2 level. We never got to the point of that disaster feeding phase, but we were prepared. So we started out serving about 28,000 meals per day, and we moved to over 51,000 meals per day at the height of COVID, which was around May here for this program. So our idea initially was to encourage our community to continue to obtain food resources for their current means for as long as possible, so we could retain any home delivery for those who were not able to get out. And our grocery stores and super centers offered drive-up services, and most of our restaurants also provided delivery and pickup. I know Jennifer's going to talk about a little bit more about the DOEA, but they did start a special program to provide meals to the homebound through restaurants through the Older Americans Act funding. So once the stay-at-home orders were activated, we started to see that initial increase, and we had to start ramping up our meal service. So we also monitored food stamp applications and unemployment applications, of course, as more individuals were laid off or let go from jobs. And this helped us determine gaps in service and where we could add food distribution sites for those areas that were hardest hit. We developed a food resource list, was posted on our COVID-19 page, and made it sort of a one-stop resource. And we worked with our 211 agency to keep the information up to date. And they developed a fast track process for agencies. So that was if an agency came and they had to make a shift in the food distribution site, they could do expedited through 211. So the information was really real time. Our local Meals on Wheels programs, and in Sarasota County, we have 4 separate Meals on Wheels programs, and our lead agency for Older Americans Act provided weekly stats on the meals that they were delivering to the homebound, just so that we could monitor that increased need. So we saw about a 90% increase in home delivery of meals during the pandemic. Sarasota County also activated their employees through the emergency declaration. So we were all able to sort of jump in and help out where we were needed. We assisted at food packing at the food bank. We worked at testing sites. We did contact tracing. Our libraries made, I can't even tell you how many thousands of masks. We were able to deliver food for Meals on Wheels, and the county also authorized county vehicles and the transportation to make these deliveries if it was needed. Our Meals on Wheels and our lead agency started a donation-based program to offer additional services. So if somebody needed something other than food, like toothpaste or laundry detergent, they could make a request. They could either pick it up at the food distribution site or it would be delivered with their meals. We also had a lot of local farmers and dairies having a decreased demand because a lot of the restaurants were closed or they weren't seeing the kind of business. So we had sites throughout the community that they brought their donations to, like here at the Department of Health, we had a huge milk cooler. So people that were coming in for vaccines or for other health services could just go to the cooler and grab a gallon and go. So that was nice. And of course, our food distribution sites opened up all throughout the county through our food bank. A few additional notes. We developed programs to provide hygiene stations, so portable bathrooms and hand washing stations throughout the community for the homeless population. The special permitting fees were waived, and Department of Health had to establish a routine inspection of locations, but they were put up throughout the community. And we also developed a relationship with 4 local hotels. So they housed our homeless population who tested positive for COVID to help with the self-isolation. So our staff coordinated transportation, the hotel room, our Meals on Wheels delivered like drop and go food for them for the duration. And then we offered assistance in assessing them for additional resources once the self-isolation was over. And we used the COVID-19 hotel guidance from the Illinois Department of Health to develop that model. So next slide, please. So during the pandemic, like most communities, we certainly recognized the need for other resources just beyond the basic needs as we got further into this. Through the DOEA and our Area Agency on Aging and community partners, we used a multitude of ways to keep people aware of resources and information, which is really important. We provided information on the Talk It Out program, and you can see the flyer there, talking about isolation and loneliness, and the SAFE survey, which was a self-done survey that assessed your COVID risk based on your behaviors. You know, if you were going out, not wearing your mask, so you could sort of see where you might be at risk and then how you could mitigate those behaviors. And then isolation and loneliness. We all know that for our older population, these have been longstanding concerns. It's nothing new to those of us that work with the population, but COVID created a whole nother level with so many people self-isolating for safety. So we already had some longstanding telephone caller, they call it telephone reassurance programs within the community. Many of the churches in our community have them, but there were a lot of opportunities for increases in these programs. I think the Senior Friendship Center that has had the longstanding one was serving close to 1,000 calls a day at the height of the pandemic. So we'll talk a little bit about the vaccine. So when the vaccine process rolled out, the registration here was done through our Department of Health website, or they had it set up using an app. So our older adult population was struggling a little bit with using these type of things. We had a lot of family members assisting to get them signed up for the registration process. So we quickly, of course, added a phone registration system so that they could call, and also an in-person assistance at the COVID vaccine sites that helped with registration. So through a partnership with the area agency and our lead agency, we started to identify homebound individuals that needed the vaccine administered at home, and we were able to make a connection with our state emergency management and got those done. I think to date, we're pretty close to about 500 people that we have assisted through our lead agency and area agency. So we also had to make a shift in our vaccine sites. So originally they were set up at the Department of Health, and we just did not have the capacity here to give vaccines to 2,000 people in a single day. So we quickly converted our vaccine site to open spaces at our local mall. They had some big stores. I think it was an Old Navy store, and I can't remember what the other one was, but they had a lot of space. We opened our vaccine sites there. It was much easier to accommodate people. It was a large space. We had ability to have a waiting room for the vaccine, a large space for observation afterwards. And because it was centrally located, it had really great access for people to come on the bus. So it worked out really well. As we rolled into it, we made one of the store locations a first dose site and one a second dose site as we progressed. And then again, staff from emergency management and our communication team were hands-on to provide resources and information. In addition to that, we had pop-up clinics that were deployed in neighborhoods where transportation was a challenge. Some of our older adult population, like at HUD housing and senior housing, and in neighborhoods where government wasn't necessarily looked upon favorably. So some areas where we needed to strengthen our relationships, and our faith-based community was really, really critical in getting those set up. I just wanted to point out the little picture at the bottom left is our public information officer, Steve, and he did a daily YouTube video from the COVID vaccine sites. It sort of became like a local celebrity. And this is a little stand up at one of our vaccination sites in the mall. And people would actually come to the mall and they would get their picture taken with this stand up, which was really comical. So we had to razz Steve a little bit about that. So next slide, please. I just wanted to just sort of quickly talk about our emergency management. Of course, you can see outlined here just a few of the key purposes of our emergency management. And one of the really important responsibilities of our Department of Health and our Health and Human Services is our coordination of our medically dependent evacuation centers. So again, as in most communities, residents that have a qualifying medical need can register with our as a medically dependent person, and this pre-registers them for transportation and sheltering at a medically dependent shelter during a disaster. And of course, with COVID-19, we had to really rework the model on how people were going to shelter. We had to put COVID-19 protocols in place using the CDC guidelines at all our evacuation centers in 2020. And those, of course, continue today. It really reduced the shelter space. It made for measures to increase sanitation and safety. It provided for a screening process for everyone, and then specific policies for people who had needed medical observation. We had to put out messaging last year, and of course this year with our hurricane guide, and again available on our website and through a variety of methods. So this was a really, really quick overview of our health and human services and community response to COVID. I am happy to share that feeding plan with anybody that is interested, sort of to see how the model was developed. And I just want to say that I really love this age-friendly community network, and sharing our best practices. Really, nobody has to reinvent the wheel here because everybody has so many great ideas that we can share. And I want to thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Sue. I really appreciate you sharing everything that has been happening in Sarasota, and we'll bring you up in just a little bit after we hear from Rebecca to have a panel discussion with everybody. So this is a reminder, if you have a question for Sue, please put it in the Q&A so we can pull it up when we get to the panel discussion. Thank you. And next we have Rebecca Roberts, who's the Director of Communications with the Florida Department of Elder Affairs, to share with us a little bit about what the department has been doing as a response as well. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today.
Laura, thank you for having me here. And oh my gosh, I've heard so many great ideas and projects and resiliency and response today. And Jennifer Barber was going to make this presentation. She cannot be here, so I will do my best to represent her and all the great work that she did and that the department has done. Certainly as COVID emerged so quickly, there were so many things that happened and happened with lightning speed. And that was the initial response that Department of Elder Affairs had with all of our 11 area agencies on aging. So we contract with 11 the area agencies on aging. We just call them the AAAs. And we had meetings every day, all the time, to decide how are we going to get meals to people as all the congregate meal sites shut down. And I loved what Susan shared about the talk it out and all those things, because the congregate meal sites, you know, it wasn't just for meals. It was also for that social interaction, for that mental health aspect of what we all need. And certainly a lot of the older adults, the congregate meal sites, that was their social inclusion. That was what they did every day. We had one lady write to us and say, I've been going to the center for 14 years. What do I do now? And she was from Palm Beach, and that response was met very quickly. A restaurant called 2J's started doing the home delivered meals. But what we had to do to get there was a little bit of a journey. So we're talking every day, all the AAAs, we're daily communicating with them, and then they in turn are communicating with their lead agencies, like say a Meals on Wheels or whatever else they have in place. If you could, next slide, please. So you had all the restaurants closing down. You had people out of work. You had seniors not getting meals. So what we did is we launched the Restaurant Meal Initiative in partnership with the Department of Business and Professional Regulation and the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association in March of 2020. And what that really did was it matched the restaurants who were closed down with the seniors who were not being able to go to the congregate meal sites and start delivering the meals. But there was a lot of waivers that had to occur to allow that to happen. There was a lot of flexibility that had to occur to allow that to happen. So certainly once the governor signed the emergency order, that allowed some things to start taking place. You had flexibility within the system so that the money, the dollars could be spent how that particular area best saw fit. So we also had to work with the Restaurant and Lodging Association. We had to make sure with the Department of Business and Professional Regulation that the restaurants were licensed. You had Jennifer Barber, who's a licensed dietitian here at DOEA. She was allowed to approve the menus, which normally would have had to go through a different process. So there was flexibility to allow approval of menus to allow the food to be delivered. And 23,000 meals, now that I heard what Sarasota had, that doesn't seem like a lot to start out with, but that was, everything had to be in place first, and it did happen very fast. And then if you can go to the next slide, we were at 1 million meals within pretty short order. So once the 1 million meals happened, there were still some barriers. So how do you get that information out? How do you get the contract signed? So there had to be all this sharing of information. So when the AAs did meet, maybe one of them would say, well, hey, use my contract here. You can go to school on this one and use that. For example, in Orlando, you have the Senior Resource Alliance, and their program was called Meals of Love. So they had a website up pretty fast, and they said, hey, if somebody else wants to use our website or some of our, go to school on some of the contracts we have, you can do that to help get that in place. And so all this happened, and it was really amazing to see all this work really so fast. I happened to start at DOEA the week before the pandemic. And so we were already in, we would come to work on weekends here at DOEA. Jennifer Barber and Kira Hogue, we were in the room safely distanced, with our masks on, trying to figure all this out, getting the AAAs on the phone, making sure that they had what they needed. One thing you had, the Families First Act came through, and that was about $18 million. And the majority of that was all for food, all for nutrition, all for meals. Then you had the CARES Act come through. So there were waivers and flexibility with how the money could be spent. It just really meant that each AAA could work out what was needed best for them. So some of the AAAs, of course, they're contracting and working with restaurants, and some of them are expanding services that they already had, that they might not have had the capacity for before, but now there's the emergency funding, they can expand that. And so all this was true resiliency. I mean, they're acting fast, they're acting flexible, they're getting the meals to people. And next slide, please. So now within 18 months, it's been 6 million home delivered meals just through the restaurant initiative. So in addition to the restaurant meal initiative, you still have the other meals that are being delivered. So all together now within the roughly 18-month period, you have over 27.5 million meals. And of that, 6 million meals is specifically through the restaurant meal initiative. And then what happened for about a 5 or 6 month period is we know there was a 200% increase in meal delivery. So it wasn't just the clients that had regularly been on a congregate meal site. If another senior wanted a meal, they were calling in and we were doing that. You still had to get somebody to sign up eventually, or they had to sign some forms, but if they needed a meal that day, they were getting a meal delivered to them. Next slide, please. And so this is one of the AAA directors. The impact that this restaurant initiative is having on the local economy and seniors can be measured by dollars and meals, but it's bringing the community together in ways that are priceless. And we saw that again and again and again. In this particular instance, for Chief's Creole Cafe, they were on the verge of closing down and going out of business. And if they had not been contracted to provide these meals, and they're pretty popular in their area, and if they had not been contracted to provide those meals, they would have gone out of business. and there would be some seniors that weren't getting the food. So it really was one of those win-win-win situations. And the way it came about is sort of an interesting story too, because the Administration for Community Living, that's the agency that gives regional and national lead on some of the elder affairs agencies. So Secretary Richard Prudhomme with Department of Elder Affairs, he was on a regional meeting with other state agencies in the South, and he'd heard about something that was being done in the state of Tennessee. And I forget exactly what city, but in a specific city in Tennessee, they had done this where they had worked with restaurants to home deliver meals, and it worked very well in that local city. And he basically thought, well, why not expand that to a statewide model? You know, can we not do that? And that's really what happened, or that's how it happened when we first started the whole program, is just to get that going. Next slide. So the other thing that was a challenge is, how do you let everybody know that we're doing that? So you had the home delivered meals. We would put the Talk It Out flyer that Susan had in her presentation. We would put other flyers in with meals. And there were the telephone reassurance calls that were also mentioned earlier. They're going out by all the AAAs and checking on people, seeing what they need, adding people to the food delivery service. But it was also important that we got other media coverage and news coverage just to get the word out there that these were available. So we had really good newspaper coverage. We tracked it for a while. We kept a lot of the testimonials, and to say people were grateful and enthusiastic doesn't begin to cover it, because everyone that got the meals have been so thankful, and it's changed their life. I mean, they would say, it's the only interaction that I've had for a month is somebody dropping off a meal to their front door. So it did much more than just feed people. It also helped them stay communicated. They communicated with somebody else outside of the house if they were feeling isolated. So part of the challenge now is to get the scalability of this, and that's sort of where we are now. With, you have a lot of the AAAs are looking to see how they can expand it, because it's still going on today. You know, we had maybe back in June it started to wind down, but then it started to ramp up again in July. So now you have a lot of the restaurants and the AAAs are looking at how they can expand and continue this, and we have some really good business models for that in certain areas. Next slide. And so again, this is from the Administration for Community Living. And I think someone was going to, Margie from DOEA was going to put that link up in the chat too. There was an article done by a think tank group, and they really took a long look, and they interviewed so many people for the Restaurant Meal Initiative to really see how it went. What were the opportunities? What were the barriers to how this all worked? And, you know, the opportunities have been that it can be expanded and scalable beyond anything we had ever known before, to match these restaurants with the older adults for meals, for home delivered meals especially. And so the barrier was really trying to get that communication out there and letting everybody know about it, and now to sustain that scalability and keep it in the forefront. But it's been a really great program, and you know, we hope to continue it as we move forward. And I've really just hit on some of the high points. The AAAs just did such a wonderful job. Without their cooperation, their help, they were all in. And they were here on the weekends talking with us too. You know, we would have the meetings every day, whenever we needed to make sure that the seniors were getting the meals. And we keep tabs on about how many congregate meal sites are opened and closed. And, you know, roughly say of maybe close to 500, you have about 275 that are now open. But I mean, that changes, that goes back and forth. So we're just keeping a tab on that, and hopefully we see more and more opening, but we can keep up the home delivered meals. So it's been a joy to work on this program. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I really appreciate you sharing this with us. And I wanted to let everybody know as well that some of this information was shared on our national age-friendly livable community conference last week. And this is incredible information. And Margie did put the link in the chat so that you can see that. And I'm going to ask both of Rebecca, Sue, and Victoria Funes to join us for a panel interview. And as we, or not interview, panel question, as we get started for that, I want to take a minute and ask everybody to pull their phones back out. If you wouldn't mind answering a word cloud for us. If you already have this up on your phone, it should automatically go to the next question for you. So in one word or a joined phrase, so it shows up, how has your community responded to the pandemic? What is one thing that your community has done in response to the pandemic? And as we are waiting for that to come on, I wanted to take a minute to introduce Victoria Funes from our office at AARP. And Sue, I see your lights are out again. I know technology is smarter than we are. Victoria, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'll start with you. I'm just asking you, we've heard a lot about what's happening. Could you share a little bit about AARP and some of our disaster education information as we're talking about responding? I also wanted to talk about, disasters as well. Would you mind, as this word cloud is coming out, would you mind spending a minute and just talking to us about that, please?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Laura. I think the most important thing that we need to remember is that there is a lot of information out there. So there isn't necessarily a lack of information issue. It's more how we communicate that information, because not everyone has access to the same channels and the same information that other people do. So we need to be mindful of that. AARP, not being a first responder, we do a lot of work in preparation for like hurricane season each year. The pandemic has been something that we've had to adjust to with information and being a resource, basically getting the type of information that we know people need and are asking for and sending them to the right place. So we act as a convener and share the information for the different sources. And it's important that we listen to what the community needs are, because again, sometimes the information is out there, but we need to dig a little deeper to make sure that those that do not have the access in the way that is being pushed out are not left behind. We do have a disaster page that we update every year. And historically, it's been at the beginning of hurricane season. We have a lot of assets. And then we had to adjust and do one for the pandemic with information about eligibility for the vaccine and all sorts of information that we were gathering. One thing that is really important that I want to make emphasis on is that we create assets every year for our disaster page that we push out throughout the duration of hurricane season. And just because people in Florida should be used to having to go through that every year doesn't mean that everyone knows what to do. And as some of the previous speakers have pointed out, climate change is really making us more vulnerable in places that historically we have not been. So just because you live in an area of the state that has not been historically impacted by a storm or a hurricane doesn't mean that it cannot happen to you. So we push out assets such as how to effectively operate a generator, how to effectively trim your trees so they will not become a target and land on your roof. Some information that may appear to be very basic, but not everyone is at the same level of information or knowledge, particularly those that live in those areas that have not been typically hit by storms.
Thank you
And
so
if we
much.
can put our disaster page on the chat so everyone has access to it.
We did. We put the disaster page, and also our vaccine distribution page link is also there
Great.
for more information. Thank you so much, Victoria. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I did have a question come in for Sue and Rebecca from the chat. Somebody wanted to know, first of all, great presentations for everybody. But did the restaurants, as far as the food delivery, did the restaurants work with dietitians to accommodate any dietary restrictions that folks may have?
I was on mute. So Jennifer Barber here is a licensed dietitian. So she was approving the menus through the restaurants for the contracts with the AAAs. So normally that would be a much longer process. But because of some of the waivers, we were allowed to do it here. She is the licensed dietitian, so it still had to meet a standard, but it went through a little differently than it might have during non-emergency times.
Great, thank you so much. Sue, did you want to add to that? Okay. If not, I do have, you're on mute, Sue.
Yeah, I'm unmuting. I think that, we have to remember that we were in an emergency situation, and the same thing was true with the sheltering, knowing that we had to redesign space and shelters for people. The truth of it is if people came and there was an impending disaster, we would just have to make the accommodations to make sure that the people were safe. So, and I think that that's probably very true in the program with the meals. The process was expedited to be able to meet the needs without it being a lengthy process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I do have one other question for you, Sue. You were talking about the COADs in your presentation, and I just wanted to ask you, do you know if every community has a COAD, or if a community does, how would you suggest they connect with them?
Our community has a COAD. I know some communities have like a certified emergency response team that responds in emergencies. Again, we're really, really fortunate that we have a strong COAD and that our county government has personnel from the county that actually work with them. We also have something built into all of our health and human services contracts that if they're receiving money through our competitive process, that they have to have a member of their organization on the COAD team. So that is built right into the contracts that we have to ensure that, everybody participates in it and everybody is there at the table. So I would, again, I'd reach out to your emergency management team through your county or your city and find out if you do have a COAD or a CERT team.
Great, thank you so much. And then a question for all of you. Do you have any, this has obviously been a very different time for all of us. Any lessons learned or any surprises that you've had along the way of how the response to the pandemic or disasters is really connected to the livable work, or maybe even highlighted the importance of the livable work as you've been working on that?
Well,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I know that we had sort of talked about how it touched on the different domains, and it's really hard to think of one domain that it this whole pandemic and response didn't touch upon. Obviously communication and getting information out is important, and civic participation and employment. We saw so many people step up and volunteer. I think at least 50% of our COVID vaccine clinics were either volunteers or paid staff, were older adults that stepped up. Medical professionals came out of retirement to get in there and help. And even, I go back to something like housing, which seems a little bit far-fetched, but when we had CARES Act funding available, we had quite a few older adults who were working that lost their jobs, that needed help paying their mortgage or their rent, that reached out through the CARES program. So again, outdoor spaces were even more important, for people to be able to get out of their homes and be safe. So it's hard to really find a domain that this pandemic didn't touch upon.
I completely agree. Thank you so much, Sue. And Victoria, I saw that you had your hand raised as well.
Sure. Yes, I'd like to follow up on that. For example, we saw a lot of communities being very active on social media from the beginning of the vaccination period by sharing information where people could get, go get tested for COVID and then go vaccinated by at the different places. There was a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress in all of our communities. So I think that having your own community, pushing that information out, it's key to what the livable work really, really does, to try to make sure that you're relevant and that you're pushing the information out to your own community, even though that information may be available through other channels. And we know it was on the news, and there was a lot of other outlets that had the same information, but a lot of people depended on just tell me what's happening in my community, because especially with the testing and the vaccines, people did not want to drive a long time or a lot of miles to be able to get those. So it was a great collaboration at the community level.
I agree, Victoria, and I think that our audience agrees as well. As you can see, collaboration is the largest by far in this word cloud. And it has definitely taken a community, a state, everybody coming together to respond to this. And I was thinking of collaboration. We collaborated with Department of Elder Affairs on Livable, Florida. AARP did, to get postcards out at the beginning of COVID, just getting information, especially to older adults that may not have access to internet. And then later on, information about vaccines. So I think it definitely, if anything, this has shown the importance of collaboration and communication and thinking of different ways to get information out. Rebecca, I didn't know if you wanted to add something as well.
One thing that I noticed in all the responses we would have, especially as the congregate meal sites closed, and I read, one of the quotes that someone had written to us, that she'd been there for 14 years, and what am I going to do now, is that it really stressed to me how it's the meal site, that social inclusion is so important for communities. It wasn't just a meal site. It was so much more, so that social involvement, civic participation, being a part of your community in some way or another just really made a difference to every person that we spoke with. So it's good to see that be an emphasis in all the cities and counties.
Absolutely. That social inclusion, dealing with social isolation has been such a key, important thing to do over this last year. Thank you all so much. I'll give you, I don't know if you have a lasting word that you'd like to say at the end of the panel. I'll give the panelists a minute if there's something else you'd like to add. Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you, everybody. As I said, there's so many great ideas and so much great work going on that we can just, rely on each other, and we have a great network with this age-friendly community.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much, all of our panelists today, for joining us and for this great information. I wanted to let everybody know that this presentation will be available. It is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it later or share it with anybody that you think may be interested. We will also provide a PDF version of the PowerPoint if you want to go back to any of the links or information that was mentioned. I know we had a question about that in the chat, but again, a sincere thank you to all of our panelists for sharing the amazing amount of work that's happening across our state. I really appreciate everybody's time and all of the resources that you have shared today. So thank you so much for being here. And as a reminder, we have our final session on October 7th, Advancing Our Age-Friendly Communities, a session about what's next, what tools are available. We will be hearing from one of AARP's national colleagues, Bill Armbruster, Secretary Prudhomme, and we will also be hearing from some statewide resources from DOT and also highlight Miami-Dade County and some of the toolkits that they've developed that other communities could utilize as well. So thank you so much for being here today, and hopefully we'll see you next week.